Welcome to Different Thinking for Different Times. I'm your host for this podcast, Steve Lentini. I like to start with a quote, and I know I've used this quote before, but Einstein's quote that I'm going to read is one of my favorites. That deeply emotional conviction of the presence of a superior reasoning power, which is revealed in the incomprehensible universe, forms my idea of God. And it's that superior reasoning power that humans have no concept of. We have the egoic, what I call the acorn brain, right? We have such small-minded thinking. And I got a peek on November 18th, 2002 of what's next. In fact, if you've listened to my podcast, you know that I say we shouldn't call it death. We should call death what's next. And so, spoiler alert, I survived that day almost 20 years ago, November 18th, it'll be 20 years. But what's amazing to me is just how small-minded our thinking is. And yet we think like that created this incomprehensible universe. Whatever you call it, God, the goddess, the divine, the Brahma, the Buddha, the Abraham, the Mohammed, the Christ consciousness, it matters not what you call it. I think I've said before that in my upcoming book, Sage Advice, Wisdom Throughout the Ages, in studying many of the sages, even modern day ones that are still with us, but the sages from BC and early times gave us an inkling into just how small-minded our thinking is. And I wonder how those people knew, especially when you think of Lao Tzu, who lived like from 300 something BC forward. When his students asked him of the life force that he was talking about, they asked him, what do you call it? And in essence, and I'm paraphrasing, you'll have to wait for the book to come out. I have the exact quote, but in essence, what Lao Tzu said is, you cannot name that which has no name. That's where I was on November 18th, 1 second in intensive care, and the next second, one with everything and nothing. Pure light, pure mercy, pure unfathomable, incomprehensible, and none of what I call the acorn brain, none of this human, egoic, hubris thinking, small-minded, limited thinking went with me. And then back in my body, there it came again, which is where I realized that's my job here, to overcome it, all that small-minded thinking, and that little voice that some call the little fucker, or Rainer Maria Rilke called it the little hooligan. So we think like God, and we don't, and we judge everyone. We judge ourselves. We carry the burdens of thinking we made sins. And there was no mention of sin in my life review, only of the good I had done. Think about that. Every bit of good that I had done flashed before me. And to me, that makes perfect sense. It may not for some, because some are mired in small-minded thinking, wanting people to pay for their mistakes here and then burn in hell forever. If it sounds small-minded, it didn't come from what Einstein described as the superior reasoning power that created this miracle we live in. I have these globes. I think you can see. Here's the big one. The larger one is here. I'll move it so you can see the smaller one. That's what we are. We're these little objects floating through something called an infinite universe. And we think we have all the answers. And then we make whole groups of people wrong so we can be right. And we're mired in a monologue and not a dialogue. Plus, it's really only your job to worry about your journey and to think about doing good, and it leaves a mark. the good you do is somehow etched onto the fabric of time. Now, perhaps, our experience at the end for what's next, at the end of this physical existence, moving into what's next, maybe it resembles what our predominant thought pattern is. So if you think there's a good chance you might burn in hell forever, maybe you'll experience that. But I never believe that. And I never did, and I never will, especially now. And the good we do makes sense to me that it's etched onto the fabric of time. How do you feel when you do good? And you overcome any small-minded thought, that acorn brain trying to tell you, don't give that person money, or don't help them, or worse, judge them, because everybody else's journey is none of my business, is certainly none of yours or ours. Your journey is your job. And you will leave here for what's next. I hope not before this podcast ends. I wish all my listeners a long life. I've been there, and I'm not sure mine won't come again before this podcast ends, and I'm not concerned about it. In fact, even getting in the ambulance the day that I was doing a seminar, never had any symptoms, never had an inkling. I was 50 years old, a month earlier. 1 second I was fine, and the next second I needed an ambulance, and a wave of gratitude came over me. I never thought about the end because it didn't occur to me at all. It didn't come into my consciousness. To me, it was just what's next. Now, little did I know 5 days later I would flatline and experience what's next. But I'm so glad I did. It changed my life forever. And the things that I learned was, number one, was there was only the now. And that's where the divine is. People go searching for God and studying with gurus and trying to find the answer to life. And really what it is accepting and embracing the now, as so many teachers have taught, which you'll read if you buy my Sage Advice book, but you can do the study yourself. Even living spiritual masters have talked about that. Eckhart Tolle talks about finding what we need in the now, because the divine is here. Can you imagine if what created the universe took its mind off of us, off this existence? It would all come to an end. Despite how we think we have so much power over the earth. And listen, I don't argue that we should take care of the earth. We should. That's all of our job. It's part of doing good. Leave everything and everyone a little better than you find them. Imagine what a world it would be. Clean your yard, clean your neighborhood. Instead of railing against people that leave trash, just pick it up. Shut up and pick it up. And then when someone comes knocking on your window for gas money at a rest area, instead of judging them, think of it as the universe giving you an opportunity to serve. The divine, God, the goddess, whatever you call it, giving you an opportunity in your journey to do some good. But this is different thinking for different times. Osho wrote the book, Your Answers Questioned. And that's the place that I'm at in my life. And I'm not urging anyone to do what I'm doing or to believe it. Because in my book, You Might Be Full of Shit If, I said, never follow anyone or anything blindly. And we can see the dangers of that demonstrated throughout history. Not just with religious fanatics like Jim Jones or the sneaker cult, but with despotic leaders and even some of our political leaders today in our country, making people wrong, whole groups of people, so they can be right. They want to stay in power. Have you ever thought why? In this country, we have career politicians. We have an elitist ruling class. It's unofficial, but it's very much like ruling classes of old. when people are reelected for 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, their whole career spent in politics. They haven't worked a day in their life. So we need term limits. I mean, if you want some of my opinions, that's a debate I'm glad to have. We need to end career politicians. I think we should begin to think of it as service to our country. One term, 8 years, whether it's Congress or the Senate, the president, or locally as governor or any other state office or local office. Serve once like the Peace Corps or the Army. Serve a term and get out. Step up. We need more people to step up instead of being apathetic and looking for the government to fix all our problems. Life is just not that way. We're supposed to have challenges to get over. And can you imagine if we took away every challenge? Then where would we have gotten some of our heroes like Rosa Parks or Martin Luther King? They would have had no opportunity to step up and make a difference. Or Mahatma Gandhi, who just kept saying, we will rule and there'll be no violence. We will rule ourselves. India will be self-governing. And it happened. But again, you have to overcome all your small-minded thinking, and it begins individually. Then you can make a difference, because leaders who can overcome small-minded thinking are willing to have a dialogue, not a monologue. And they're not going to point fingers. They're going to model great behavior for their citizens. Think about the behavior our leaders are modeling, very small-minded, finger-pointing, and then they expect the general population to behave differently and not to have such strong reactions to things. Our leaders are doing it. We need different thinking for different times. That's what this podcast is about. And so now I'll be able to do a video and an audio version thanks to Spotify using Riverside FM, which my other podcast, You May Be Full of Shit If, is on Riverside. So I'm glad and grateful they did it. And I'm just expressing what goes on in my mind, knowing that I'm full of shit somewhere and I have to get over myself and that my journey is my business. But I'm glad to have a dialogue with others who disagree with me. I just want you to ponder your answers. Get to the place where you can question any of this small-minded thinking. And if it sounds small-minded, it doesn't come from what's next, from that superior reasoning power that created this incomprehensible universe as Einstein describes. But you got to prove that to yourself. If you want to hang on to a small-minded life and small-minded thinking, then go ahead. That's okay. That's your journey. It's your business. But just see what limitless, infinite thinking, embracing and accepting each moment as something from the divine, from that superior reasoning power, coming to perhaps wake you up to change your life instead of railing against it. But that's up to you. Give it a try or not. Any questions, you can reach me, Steve, at stevelentini.com. That's Steve at stevelentini.com. My Twitter handle is at splentini, Lentini, SP as in Paul, Lentini. Facebook is Steve Lentini. Reach out to me. Have a dialogue. If you want to be a guest on either of my podcasts,